Assign y'all students to come?
Well, we can't assign them to come, but I gave them extra credit for coming.
Yeah, you got the power to do that, man.
Well, nah, bro. I like
swear that's what Edmunds would do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mandatory.
Yeah. I gotta abide by the rules, you know.
Yeah.
Everybody can't be a habitual rule breaker.
Channel your inner Rick James.
Yeah, I do inside the classroom.
Okay.
Habitual line stepper.
Yeah.
And I have some of your students, they were like, can we have the same assignment so we get credit in 2 classes?
What did you tell them?
Absolutely.
Oh, you should have told them I'm not a pushover like Dr. Edmunds.
No, I tell them I want to be like Dr. Edmunds when
Man, okay, we populating a little bit.
Yeah, Edmunds, that first link you sent me isn't working.
It's not?
Yeah, the one that you texted to me for people to join.
I threw the link in the chat again if you want to grab it from there.
Okay. Did you just put it in there? Or is it in there from earlier?
I put it in earlier, but I just dropped it back in there again as well.
Okay, cool.
When I pulled from the announcements and sent to my students.
Sure. Wait, which chat? Are you talking about the text one? The
Like
group chat?
he's talking about the chat on the Zoom.
Oh, okay, I got you. Cool.
All right. Oh. Okay, greetings, everybody. You are now officially a part of the 15th annual Cal U Hip Hop Conference. Despite the constraints of the pandemic, I'm thrilled that we're able to still continue this magnificent endeavor. I'm Dr. Kelton Edmunds, co-moderator. I'm a professor of history here at Cal U, and I'm also the organizer of this annual hip hop conference. Today's event is the encore to our Tuesday keynote panel that featured Dr. Cornel West and Jeff Chang. Tuesday's panel was outstanding on so many levels. So much to unpack about what we discussed and engaged in on Tuesday. We navigated a range of topics and we were thoroughly enlightened by Professor West and Jeff Chang. For anyone who missed Tuesday's panel, you can view that on Cal U's YouTube channel. It's accessible to anybody. Our roundtable today focuses on one question. What's next for hip hop, artistically and academically? This is where we merge the two and we unpack the two, all right? We brought in some of the sharpest minds from North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Los Angeles to address that loaded question. Now, for everybody in the audience, you can direct your questions directly to the Q&A. I just asked a specific person you ask your question in the Q&A when you type it in the Q&A. Our stellar panelists on our roundtable today would include Dr. William Boone, who is chair of the Liberal Studies Department at Winston-Salem State University. His favorite artists are Jadakiss and also Freddie Gibbs. Our next roundtable panelist is Professor Brian Turman, who teaches hip hop studies and African American literature at the almighty North Carolina A&T State University. Aggie pride all day, baby. All right, that's right. Favorite artist, Jay-Z. And his favorite moment was Old Dirty Bastard at the 98 Source Awards when he proclaimed that Wu-Tang was for the children. All right. Next we have national recording artist on Rostrum Records and Cal U alum, my
What's
favorite
up?
color.
What's up? How are you? How are you?
All right.
Happy to be here.
One of my former great students that came to half of my classes. All right. All right.
Yeah, you can't let them know that, man. Like,
Okay. Then we have Dr. Jessica Spradley, who is in the Cal U psychology department. And she is someone in a short amount of time who has made a significant impact on our campus. First arriving as the FDI visiting scholar and somebody who students rave about. All right. We're glad to have her. Her favorite artist. We see this consistent theme of Nas and also Talib Kweli. One of her favorite hip hop quotables is "To live is to suffer, to survive." Well, that's to find meaning in the suffering. And that's paying homage to none other than DMX. Outstanding, outstanding. Our co-moderator for the evening is Dr. Rodney Taylor, who is in the Cal U English department and specializes in African-American literature. His favorite artists are Bun B and Tupac. So now we have some diversity in here. And his favorite hip hop quotable is "Always calm under pressure. No need to act ill. Listen when I tell you, boy, you got to chill." That's from Eric and Parrish Making Dollars, or EPMD. Again, for anybody who has a question throughout this roundtable, please post it in the Q&A and attach a specific name of somebody who you want to address your question. All right, I want to get started right away. And my first question is to our co-moderator. All right, our co-moderator. And Dr. Rodney Taylor, you said one of your favorite hip hop moments was when Kendrick Lamar won the Pulitzer Prize. Can you elaborate on that? Why was that so significant? Why was that such a seminal moment from your perspective in hip hop?
Yeah, so I think that if we see things in this sort of like symbolic order of literature and culture, and you look at it like this sort of pyramid where you're going to put like literature with a capital L at the top, and then you're going to maybe at the bottom of this pyramid put like video games and TV shows and movies, and then you try to think where do you put hip hop into that sort of hierarchy? Well, I think that with Kendrick Lamar for his album Damn winning the Pulitzer Prize, that completely destabilizes that hierarchy and that symbolic order, and it puts hip hop in its deserved spot in the pantheon of American arts and letters. So that's really why it was significant, because that's the first time ever, and I hope it's not the last. Because previously you've had jazz and R&B artists winning, but for a hip hop artist or hip hop MC recording artist, and to get that sort of institutional validation is profound and significant. So that was when I remember I might have been listening to NPR or radio or something, I can't remember, and then the album was Damn, and then I heard it and I was like, damn. So I was like, that's pretty good.
Outstanding, honest. And Dr. Taylor is also a former Frederick Douglass Institute visiting scholar who is making major waves on our campus here at Cal U. We're glad to have him. Absolutely. Dr. Spradley, I'm coming right to you now. You said one of your favorite moments in hip hop was when Chance the Rapper won a Grammy for his all-stream label-free album. Why is that such an important moment when we talk about the pantheon of hip hop?
Yeah, because I think that when I think about hip hop, a lot of the controversy that I've been exposed to has been around like artists and labels, right? And so we think about people out there being entrepreneurs. I was telling you earlier, I would love to see Chance the Rapper selling some CDs out the trunk of his car as people were leaving, right? But when he won that Grammy, it was like he could do it on his own terms, right? He didn't need the justification or approval of a label to do it, or the financial backing, right? And so now he has his own bag. He can do whatever he wants. And he is not tied to anybody. And so I think that was it gave me a sense of freedom in hip hop that I hadn't seen before.
Okay. And just When we circle back around and speak to you again, Dr. Spradley, can you adjust your audio slightly? You're kind of going in and out.
Is that better?
That's a lot better. That's a lot better.
Okay.
All right. Okay, Dr. Boone.
Yes.
You said one of the most profound hip hop quotables, in your opinion, was the only thing worse than a coward is a coward with power, by none other than Jadakiss. Why is that such a profound statement, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Kelt. Thank you for to my esteemed colleagues on the panel. You know, I'm a Jadakiss. I'm a unabashed sort of New York centric, East Coast centric fan of hip hop. But in terms of that quote, I think if we look at hip hop historically, or we look at its origins, I mean, hip hop has always spoken truth to power, and so this question of or this critique of power, I think, is very, very important. And it's also there's a subtext there that those in power should be courageous. And so Jadakiss is very, very, very heavy-handed in his critique of power brokers or those in power, whether it be politicians or professors who hide behind position and power.
Don't throw a rock and hide your hand.
Yes.
Yeah. Professor Turman,
Sir.
out of all the artists that, you know, and you go back, you understand hip hop's origins, but in your opinion, Jay-Z, he's the greatest. Why do you put him on that pedestal?
Well, man, for me, man, I think first of all, man, I second what Dr. Boone said, man. Thanks for the invite, man. Shouts out to the esteemed colleagues, man, and the audience. Appreciate you all being here. As Jay-Z said, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us.
Mm-hmm.
So we appreciate that. But man, I think if you just look at a hip hop career historically, we're talking 2 or 3 years of active work, maybe another 4 or 5 of relevance, maybe 10 where people remember your name. We're talking about a guy who dropped his first album in 1996 and was just on the J Electronica album last year. Consistent work over that amount of time in hip hop. I mean, we're talking that's Rolling Stones, that's you know, Earth, Wind and Fire, that's Stevie Wonder, that's big time stuff, man. You just don't get that in any musical genre, but to then do that in hip hop. So I'm not saying in terms of the greatest of all time that he's the best. That's not for me what great in this context stands for. But I think if you look at the totality of it, I don't care if you want to use as your rubric record sales, or you want to use longevity, or you want to use importance in the culture. I mean, there was a time when Jay-Z and New York was the culture. Now, I would submit that, you know, he's had a bunch of stuff falling his way. I don't think that Jay-Z's the king of New York if Biggie was alive, but Biggie's not alive. And Jay-Z has kept it going since 1996, man. And for me, in a genre of music like hip hop, that would lead to the GOAT stats. Like Tom Brady's not the greatest quarterback ever, but he's the GOAT. You're walking around with 8 Super Bowls. It is what it is.
Absolutely. All right, word up. All right, my favorite color.
What's up, man?
Yeah, I'm your former professor, but I'm also a fan, and I'm also extremely proud of you, man. So
I appreciate it, bro.
I'm going to take your first question in a different direction. I remember the last semester you were in my class, and I was, you know, trying to self-promote and tell everybody, like, y'all need to sign up for the second part of Afro history now. Come on. And I remember you saying, like, I would, Dr. Edmunds, but I'm not going to be here. I'm like, so where you going to be? You transferring to another school? He's like, no, I'm about to pursue this rap thing full-time, going hardcore.
Exactly, bro.
I remember that semester, and I look at where you are today, man, and that's a powerful testimony, man.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Seriously, I appreciate
it. Yeah. I want to ask you, you know, do you remember the moment that you fell in love with hip hop, and what are the things that kind of stand out to you, and kind of if you try, when I talked about, you said when in my class you said I'm gonna go full time and pursue this career to where you are today. Can you kind of just chart that for us?
Can y'all hear me good?
Yeah.
All right, cool. I think I fell in love with it like at a really young age. Like, I mean, I'm younger than y'all, of course, but like I fell in love with it like when I was on MySpace, like listening to Gucci Mane and Lil Wayne and stuff. Like, but I had an older mother, so she would just listen to so much like Tupac around the house, Nas, Jay-Z, Big L, like all types of people. So I was like, this is super cool. I want to do this. So I'm like one of those dudes like in this generation that says like I was rapping before it was cool, because I literally been rapping since I was like 11 years old. I knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't want to go to college to get a degree. I wanted to go to college to meet people with like the same mindset I had. So I went there, found the producers I needed, found the band I needed, and now I'm here.
That's what's up. That's what's up. And a little bit about the label that you're on, the history of that.
For sure. I'm signed to Rostrum Records, label founded by Benji Grimberg. They're responsible for like launching the careers of Mac Miller and Wiz Khalifa. Rich the Kid just signed to us. They're a dope label, man. It's an independent label. They look out for me like I'm family, honestly. And I legitimately couldn't really ask for more. Like anything I need, they got me for real. So it's really great. They let me not even just rap, like they're letting me like write skits for rappers and just all types of stuff, man. Like it's super dope situation. And they moved from Pittsburgh to LA. So it's like they're right down the street. You know what I mean? So yeah, like anything I need, they got me.
Yeah, so you're tapping into all your creativity. Can you explain the name to me?
My favorite color?
Yeah.
Well, whenever I was I told my mom, I was like, yeah, I want to be a rapper. Like, and she's like, all right, well, you need a cool stage name. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And she was like, but coming up with your own style is like coming up with a color you've never seen before. So I was like, okay, that's a cool way to put that, I guess. So one day I was recording a song and I'm like, wow, I never heard nothing like this before. Like, I guess this is my favorite color. So like, it was just like, yeah, like I'm just my favorite color by default because I'm my favorite person.
That's what's up. I like mom.
She's a genius.
She sounds very wise right there. Yeah. So I mean, just glad to have everybody here, and we kind of want to transition a little bit to the academy, and we'll get back to the artistry, and maybe we'll talk both at the same time. But I guess I'll direct this first to Brother Terman, who teaches, whose classes fill up every semester. His hip hop studies courses. Where do hip hop studies courses fit into the academy and the university, and how should hip hop music and culture be used in the classroom? Enlighten us on that, Brother Terman.
Oh, well, I think, man, hip hop for me is interdisciplinary. I think you could do with hip hop whatever you want, man. That's one of the beautiful things about hip hop. It's like this amoeba; it doesn't have any sides. So whatever it creeps into, it tends to take on that aura or that essence of that thing. So if you could probably find some hip hop in engineering or some hip hop in any other stems, and certainly, man, for me, I attack hip hop from a literary standpoint. My degrees are in African American literature, and so I look at hip hop as the extension of Black and Brown literature. And for me, that would include not only the folk tales and spirituals and chants, but the jazz, the blues, the gospel, the R&B, the soul, and that hip hop is just another extension of that. So from that standpoint, the humanities would be a place in the academy that hip hop could live in any of the humanities: history, art history, literature, dance, anywhere there. But I think also business has a place for hip hop, like the economics of hip hop. I think one of the things that people who are successful in hip hop, like a Kanye West, have figured out capitalism, which is not an easy thing to figure out. Particularly, even though Kanye had perhaps a better start than some, particularly not coming from means, learning how to work with money and how to actually handle it. So, and I think that hip hop, man, you could talk economics in hip hop and business, management, marketing for sure. So I think anywhere in the academy, psychology, I think there's some very serious issues going on in terms of, how hip hop may or may not affect one's behavior, sociology for sure. So I think if you name any department in any most universities, you're going to find a place for hip hop. And you can forget music and dance and art. Those are shoe-ins. But in terms of where it's going, I think that its place, man. I had one of my brothers, man, fond of saying, man, shouts out to Terrence Muhammad. He's fond of saying hip hop goes as Black people go. And there was a time when we were on Malcolm X hats and African medallions, and hip hop was on African hats and Malcolm X medallions. When Black folk are on, a get money ethos, hip hop is on a get money ethos. I'm very interested now in Afrofuturism, and how that shapes with hip hop. I know Boone and I have had some conversations surrounding that. I just think that hip hop, man, is this thing that's out in the ether now. It's not going anywhere. It can go everywhere, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in around the hip hop studies question. I have sort of a love-hate relationship with hip hop studies, to be quite honest. My dissertation's on hip hop, and so one of my fears in terms of hip hop studies is what I would consider sort of the co-option of hip hop culture, and the institutionalization of hip hop culture. So if we look at, for example, jazz music, if we look at even Native American culture, right? We study these things in higher education, but I'm not sure if we have a profound love for these themes, these phenomena, if you will. So that's really troubling. And so if we look at the first hip hop course at Howard in 1991, which is at HBCU, and we look at the trajectory of hip hop studies, it's been primarily a research one, elitist endeavor. And that's fairly troubling for me. In other words, is hip hop studies a working class movement, or is it merely another appendage of Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, and what have you? And one last point, I think if we track the Grammys, hip hop Grammy, the best rap albums, we can kind of see what I'm talking about. Eminem has the most Grammys, right? So for me, that's problematic for several reasons, because it really does represent the sort of revisionist history, the whitewashing of Black culture, if you will. Just want to problematize it a bit.
Yeah. All right. I guess I'll go to my next question. If Dr. Spradley, did you want to respond to that, or would you prefer me to go to my next question?
Oh, let me respond. I think that because I think it's a combination of both of the two, right? I think that what happens a lot of times is we want to create a space for hip hop in academia, but we don't want to create a space for people to be authentic in hip hop and academia, right? And that's where the love part comes in, because it's not just something that you can teach, it's something that you have to feel. And if professors aren't doing that, then it just becomes an academic discipline when it's so much more than that.
Kel, if I could, and I think that what both our Doctors Boone and Spradley have addressed here is something that I've battled a lot. Hip hop is not it's an academic pursuit, but it should be pursued by academics who have an understanding of the culture. And I think lucky for us in the 21st century, there are a bunch of them. I mean, you just heard on My Favorite Color talking about being college educated. I've been at A&T long enough to know that I've produced several hip hop engineers who are guys who are wearing Timberland boots and doing whatever engineers do. So I think that as we've moved forward, that some of that criticism, perhaps, of hip hop is more centered in the early days. I think that now, like, you got Knife Wonder doing work at Central and Duke. Knife Wonder is no academic who learned hip hop in a textbook. And I think that there are, and I could name 5 or 6 others. Myself, Dr. Boone, it would be those. We know Dr. James Peterson is somebody who does hip hop work inside the classroom, but is also a hip hop person. So I'll agree with what both of Dr. Boone and Spradley said. I'll add to that we're in a different space now in this 21st century. And there are a lot of people who are hip hop accountants, if you will. They're accountants by trade, by study, by education, but all things else, they're hip hop. Like, they're probably listening to, whoever's new on the way to the office. And I think that we're lucky enough now as a culture to be in this space. But I think we're all aware as academics how precious interest into this space is. A little easier for me at an HBCU to be my authentic self. But I also think that that's on the folk who are walking around here with PhDs who could have been their authentic selves, but for whatever reason chose not to in order to acquiesce or perhaps gain entrance into that academy. I'm thankful of them because without them, there's no me. However, that's not necessary nowadays. Like, you don't have to hide your hip hop. Like, you walk past my office at any given time, you're going to hear some hip hop coming out of it.
Yeah, that's what's up. I have one more question, and before my co-moderator asks his question, I'll start with my favorite color. But just in terms of social responsibility, like particularly today, there's so much going on, politically, socially. I mean, as heartbreaking as the George Floyd incident, murder was a summer ago, we're now reliving that again today through this trial. I wanted to ask everybody about the burden and also the social responsibility that people try to place on hip hop artists to always be out front and outspoken. Do you think that's unfair, or do you think that hip hop is in a unique situation where it can respond and deal and cause a greater awareness? Or in the case of electrifying the vote in Atlanta, which paid dividends in terms of the presidency and the Senate races, hip hop artists lending their time, speaking at rallies, passing out water, handing out food, and letting Stacey Abrams speak at the verses, right? So is that an unfair burden that we place on hip hop artists, or should they be the ones to take up that mantle and use their platforms to help uplift causes? I'll start with you. Do you feel that burden, my favorite color? Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
My bad. But yeah, definitely I felt that before. But personally, I think people who expect artists to speak on everything, I think that's kind of selfish on their part. But I also think it's super understandable because a lot of people turn to hip hop and their favorite artists whenever they want to answer that they can't answer themselves. Like, a lot of artists have helped people through depression. A lot of them have helped them through tough breakups and happiness and this and that. So anytime there's any type of like confusion, a lot of people do turn to artistry, but I think it puts a lot of pressure on rappers and singers and whoever else, songwriters, whenever they have to, be held accountable to do something like that personally. But I definitely understand it, like from a consumer perspective. And as an artist myself, I try to touch on everything I can, but at the end of the day, I'm still touching on the things that I want to touch on. You know what I mean?
Dr. Spradley, did you want to weigh in on that, on the burdens of that? Are these unfair burdens that we place on hip hop artists, or are these in fact the things that we need them, since this is the #1 genre of music in the world? These are the things that they need to be addressing and using their platforms for these purposes.
I mean, so here's the reality is there's an unfair burden to everything, right? If we think about the social consequences of being a star or being famous, there's an unfair burden of having people listen to everything that you say. I mean, people listen to, I don't know, the Kardashians, like I want them to listen in my classes, right? So we have to recognize that with fame, there comes a burden. So that's the first part. I think that the second part is we have to be able to separate identity from advocacy, right? Just because you look like a person that is being oppressed doesn't mean that you have to advocate against that oppression. That's when it becomes unfair, because we're saying, you know what? You're representing the Black and brown community because you are Black and brown. I need you to say this, or you have to do this. And that's not for everybody. It's not everybody's lane to be an advocate. Does that mean it makes you less of a great MC? No. Does it mean that you should probably not step in any advocacy lane? Maybe, right? But we have to understand that it's not, everybody doesn't want to be a social justice warrior. And the pressure comes when we don't allow people to have an out. That's what I think.
Dr. Boone or Professor Turner?
Yeah,
Great.
I concur. I just also add that I think it's Dyson that has a line that says, there's this special burden on Black artists wherein they have to represent the wishes and whims of some 30 million people, which is an impossible burden to put on anybody. I think the other thing that happens is we oftentimes should separate commercial hip hop from hip hop. I think that even in this conversation so far, most of our conversation has really been based on commercial hip hop, the stuff that you hear on the radio. Well, if you're looking for social justice on the stuff that you hear on the radio, then you're not looking in the right place anyway. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, because that space has never been a harbinger of social justice warriors, as the doctor said. So I think that we do put that special burden, but I think we put that burden on most Black folk. Like some of us in this room have the burden of being the only educated person or one of the few more than college educated people in their family. And, folk might call you for particular things as a special burden. So, it is what it is. But I think we do that to artists, and artists shouldn't have to carry that mantle unless they want to.
That duality, that beauty and burden of Blackness. All right, Dr. Broom.
Yeah, I just gonna add a couple more pieces. I think sometimes the social justice component is embedded in subtext, so it's not always on the surface. So, I'm more interested in what happens behind closed doors, how hip hop artists interface with CEOs from record companies, for example. I mean, there's a level of social justice occurring there. And then like two questions come to mind. Is hip hop radical discourse? I mean, I think sometimes we'd like to think it is, but oftentimes when we look deeper at lyrics and deconstruct lyrics, we find that they just reflect American idealism. They weave in and out of American idealism and radical discourse or pseudo-radical discourse. And then also, to what extent can hip hop be an agent to reimagine the American project? And I think that's important, because if it's not reimagining what it means to be an American or a global citizen for that matter, it's essentially replicating what's been done, whether it be a patriarchy, whether it be consumption, what have you. But then I also think we have to unpack American celebrity in order to fully understand this. When I was in Ghana, I did research on Hip Life, Reggie Rockstone. This is years ago, who was the biggest hip life artist at the time in Ghana. And you really didn't see the type of paparazzi and celebrity that we see with American artists. So I think that the celebrity that is so rampant in American pop culture is problematic in and of itself, which presents other issues with social justice and corporatization and all these other things. So it's a very complex kind of issue, I think.
Awesome. So now we have a question about the educational and pedagogical sort of implications, and I'll direct this question towards Dr. Spradley first, and then of course the esteemed panel is more than welcome to chime in on that. So for Dr. Spradley, you can take it first, as that two of the contemporary topics in education are critical race theory and culturally responsive pedagogy. Where does hip hop fit in?
Oh, that's a good question.
Sure
So I will say that in my doctoral work, I talked about how critical race theory and its utilization in the classroom can impact students' attitudes about race, right? And so when I think about the way that hip hop fits into that, it allows us to centralize race in the conversation. We can't talk about hip hop without acknowledging the amazing things that have come from communities of color, right? And so what it does is it allows us to give voice and space in the academy, not just for the genre of hip hop, but all the contributions of the people of color that have come before us, who are paving the way, right? And when we do that, what we do is we essentially create culturally relevant pedagogy. Hip hop in itself is a counter narrative to Eurocentric education. And so if we can allow it to be in the curriculum, centralize race, and give voice to people of color that haven't been heard before, because I appreciate what the other panelists said, like there's a difference between hip hop that we hear on the radio and the stuff that is getting down to some political activism and talking about what is really going on in the world. Not saying, you know, mainstream doesn't do that, but y'all know what I'm talking about. But when we do that, we provide a voice in the academy that we are really trying to amplify now. And we allow it to speak for itself, right? We don't have to be the voices of the entire Black community because we have a lot of different voices that people can actually hear. We're just sharing our platform.
Does anyone else care to chime in on that? All right, so then I have another question for the panelists. And my previous, like when Dr. Edmunds was asking, like, well, why was Kendrick Lamar winning the Pulitzer Prize so significant? I'm like, well, we got this symbolic order, and we have this notion, especially if you study historically distant stuff, you get in these conversations about high and low art. So that's something that I wanted to draw attention to for this panel and have this conversation about high art forms, low art forms. So for any panelists who would like to chime in on it, do you make a distinction between high and low art? And if so, or if not, where does hip hop fit into that dichotomy?
Well, I think that goes back down to some of what Professor Boone, Dr. Boone was talking about earlier, and that would be just the whole canonization of knowledge. Once you start putting bricks on top of bricks ideologically and saying that there is a high or low art, I think that's in and of itself problematic, particularly if we look at the folk who created said hierarchy, so that somehow a Rembrandt painting is way more significant, important to analyze than some cave drawings in Lascaux, France, or the hieroglyphs in Egypt, or native art anywhere else in the world. And I think that if we look at this idea of high and low art from there, then hip hop would have climbed that ladder, I guess, to keep the analogy going. I think if we look at what Herc and them were doing in the early 70s, that based on the hierarchy and the canon created of folk who lived in the 70s would have been low art. I don't think we could have gotten around that. I think to suggest that hip hop is low art in the 21st century would have to be remiss of all the beautiful things that the culture has done. You just mentioned Kendrick Lamar winning the Pulitzer. Well, low art doesn't win Pulitzers, or the people who produce low art are not supposed to, based on the canon, win Pulitzers. So I would, I guess just say that hip hop has always been high art to some of us. The problem is we weren't the ones with the scales in our hands. I know when I heard Eric B. and Rakim's My Melody sometime in the middle 80s as a young kid in the projects of Statesville, North Carolina, that was high art to me. If you would have asked me then, not knowing what was high art or low art, if you said, hey, young Brian, is this high art? I would have said, hell yeah. If you had played me a Johnny Cash record, I would have said that was low art. I mean, so I think once again, that all comes down to who's holding the scale. And for a very long time, only particular people have held the scale. And i.e. ergo, hip hop has been considered by the canon low art. But for many of us, it's always been high art.
Thank you. Anyone else care to touch upon that?
Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead. No, don't go ahead. My favorite color, please. No, I'll defer to the artist.
For sure. I personally think hip hop's like the highest art. Like, I mean, even subconsciously, like so many people dress this way because of hip hop. So many people talk the way they talk because of hip hop. Like, hip hop is a non-stop, just huge entity of like, just personality, emotion, style. It's just everything. Like, it's so much more than music. And I think even like white kids who don't enjoy hip hop are influenced by accident. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a non-stop art form, and that's why I love it the most. So yeah, I would say it's the highest art, honestly. I see hip hop everywhere I go. That's why I'm able to write something about everywhere I go.
Yeah, I'll just add to both points. I think Professor Terman's identification of subjectivity is important. We talk about aesthetics. But if we think back on jazz culture in terms of how it was viewed in terms of higher and low art, or blues for that matter, or spirituals, it was always viewed as sort of dirty, low art, right? And so if we're looking at it through a historical lens, we understand if we fast forward to the 21st century that was wrong. That analysis, not only was it racist, but it was just flat out wrong. But however, I do want to differentiate between sort of the apprenticeship and the investment of time between, say, a jazz artist, because I'm a musician and I'm an MC, or reformed MC, between a jazz artist, what it takes to be a top jazz artist, and what it takes to be a hip hop artist. I wouldn't say one is high or low, but clearly there's a distinction given the SoundCloud culture, and these are different processes. Not sure if one is higher or lower, but me personally as an artist, I don't know if they're the same. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boone.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I want to kind of switch gears and speak about there are a lot of women artists that are blazing trails right now. I mean, just doing crazy numbers, crazy streams right now, from Rhapsody to Coil Ray to Nicki Minaj, of course, to Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B. What are some of your evaluations on the representations of women in hip hop? There are those voices that suggest that maybe it's too heavy, the industry's too heavy on the exploitation side of it. But then you hear those voices that contend that that are in the camp of this is liberation. That's a better operative term in terms of referring to the representation of women in hip hop. I probably should start with Dr. Spradley on this one.
That's funny because I was gonna say I'll go last.
No.
Okay, so that's fine. You can bring up the anchor then, Dr. Spradley. Any of the fellas want to take a stab at this first so she can correct you?
Whatever
Yeah,
she
I
wants.
guess I want to try for sure.
I go with her.
Yeah, I'll definitely chime in. I feel like, in my lifetime at least, I think this is like the most on top women have ever been. Growing up, I always wondered why it wasn't like this a lot earlier. So it's just really cool to see. It seems like these women artists are giving women so much confidence. It seems like they're just legitimately enjoying who they are finally, and just enjoying whatever they want to do. So I always felt like women could do whatever they want, and it's super dope to actually see it happen in person. So yeah, I love it, man. This is amazing. Like literally, I love all the songs too. Like they're just all hella fire.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll say I don't know if I love it all, but I do respect art. However, I'm a little more concerned about what Hunter and Soto describe as the pornographic gaze in terms of women of color. And so on one hand, I could view some of what I'm seeing, let's say Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B. I think artists have a right to create art as they wish, as profane or as sacred or secular as they like. So I'll leave that there. However, I do think it's very interesting that some of the more prominent female artists of color are relying on what Hunter is describing as his pornographic gaze. In other words, they're tapping into previous tropes around stripper culture, around pornography, which to me is problematic if there are not other images to balance that out. It seems to me that there is a focus on this type of wapification of women in hip hop. So that's my personal.
Wow, wapification. I got
Wapification. That's more for the day.
Yeah, real quick. I think, especially like referring to the stripper part, I think as an artist, you just need to rap about your life. You know what I mean? You talk about what you've been through, there's men rappers out here talking about how they were pimps, you know what I mean? But Cardi B happened to used to be a stripper, so she's referring to that, you know what I mean? And she came up from that. So I never like try to belittle it because of the stripping or anything they're referring to that used to be their life.
Well, can I just respond to that? Well, it's not. I'm not belittling. I would just like to see more diversity in terms of the images. So, for example, I would love to hear more about Cardi B as a mother. For example, there seems to be this preoccupation with this pornographic gaze, right? Showing your body in ways that, in a way we know this is we don't always see the same kind of performance around men. Right, you don't see male hip hop artists with Speedos and their shirts off in these very sort of pornographic poses. So that's my only issue. But I think they're free to create as a, I appreciate it on the level.
That's the thing though. A lot of those males have those women around them in the music videos. So it's like now those women, they have a voice now. Like they're not just the girls dancing meaninglessly in a video anymore. Like they're actually just doing what they want and being who they are. And I think that's dope, bro.
Yeah, I think, man, that female hip hop artists have faced the same burden as we were talking about earlier as all Black artists. And that is, on the one hand, are they allowed to be fetishized, whether or not they want to be? Or are they supposed to be on some pro-woman, pro-Black feminism type of stuff? I would submit that it's okay for them to be whatever they want to be. I think that once again, the conversation we're having centers on commercial hip hop. Like we're talking about the radio. So I wish we would just kind of couch all of our comments by saying what we hear on the radio, because there are a ton of female artists who perhaps aren't as well known as Meg or Cardi or Nicki, who are doing pretty well for themselves through hip hop. Rhapsody, for one, several Grammy nominations, not worrying about eating. Perhaps she's not as well known as them, but I think that goes back to what Dr. Boone was saying earlier in terms of celebrity and this idea that if we see you a lot, you're somehow better than the person who we don't see a lot. Well, that ultimately falls on us, because there are women artists who do pro-women stuff, who are talk about, as Boone said, being mothers, who aren't strippers, never have been, don't want to be or be seen as them. And then we have artists who were, and enjoy strip clubs. Like there should be enough room for all of that. But for some reason, Black artists have to fit into these very nice molds. And if you don't, somehow you're disrespectful of yourself or hip hop or our culture or the dang world. And I think that's perhaps as much of an audience problem as it is an artist problem.
I think we also have to think about who's creating these molds, right? Like, let's problematize this idea of being sexualized or fetished, because the idea of the Jezebel was there before Cardi B, right? There's been an over-sexualization of Black women that they haven't been able to control for hundreds of years. And so I think that when I see people like Cardi B, Meg Thee Stallion, it's no different than when MC Lyte was talking about needing a roughneck, right? Like, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what she was saying back then. And I hope my kids don't know it now. But you see, like, they're just dressed differently than she was, right? And so one of the things that I think that we really have to question is who is creating what is an acceptable identity? Because who's to say that Cardi B is not talking about being a mom, right? Who's to say she's not talking about being a wife? Because as the same way we want to attack girls or Cardi B, I'm just going to use Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion because everybody has been up in arms about WAP, right? And everybody wants to see the outrage. But I don't know anybody that's talking about the outrage for dudes that want their wives or girlfriends or significant others or whoever wants their person to be like that. Right? We can't just get outraged over somebody talking about it in a song. We've got to get outraged over the societal expectation that if you are not that, then you cannot be a good significant other, wife, mom, whatever. And so it's just, is problematic because we want to say don't do it, but then we don't want to create a space where people don't have to do it in order to be seen as desirable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, excellent, excellent. I appreciate all of that. In the Q&A, people want to know. People want to know my favorite color. Who are some of your most impactful influences in terms of your artistry? What MCs influence you the most?
Man, I like so many people, but love Jay-Z, of course. You already know that. MF Doom meant a lot to me. Kendrick Lamar, Isaiah Rashad, Nerd, just the whole collective. Nerd really like taught me how to branch outside of the box whenever it comes to hip hop, but it still be rooted in hip hop. Tyler the Creator, Kanye West, of course. It's a lot of people, man. Honestly, there's nothing that I flat out hate. You know what I mean? I try to just dip into a little bit of everything and get something from everything and everyone. So little pieces of everything, honestly. Gucci Man, Young Dolph, like it doesn't stop, bro. Like I like polar opposites of artists sometimes because I'm probably bipolar or something.
And you've lived in different regions of the country too, in Pittsburgh and in California. So yeah, I mean you spoke on MF Doom, and I kind of want to ask, see if I can get some of the panelists to respond to this. What are the legacies of MF Doom and DMX, two artists that were very unique and very impactful and left us all too early?
Man, I think, do you mean like, do I think they left a good legacy, or like what exactly did they leave?
Both.
I think whenever it comes to MF Doom, you know, he let people be those weird people they always were, you know? There is no music sounding like MF Doom's music whenever he first dropped. That's why I feel like he wasn't consumed as quickly as so many other artists. But as I got older and older and learned about him, I noticed so many artists that I looked up to that people didn't like loved him. You know what I mean? And I branched into him around like maybe 14, and I understood exactly why they liked him. He just took so many chances. He self-produced and just so much stuff he did, man. It was just really awesome. I loved his beats. I loved how he chose his samples. I loved everything. I loved this whole image. I loved this whole aesthetic. I just thought he was amazing. Rest in peace, definitely. And I mean, DMX is just superstar, man. Like you can't even really question that one. So definitely RIP DMX too. Love him to death.
Yeah. Anybody else want to tap in on that one?
I mean, I'll talk about Doom, man. I think lyrically, as my favorite color talked about, lyrically, Doom is one of these cats, man, who just maybe in the last 4 or 5 years was getting his just due in terms of just how, as the brother said, how many chances he took lyrically. He's somebody, man, who created, man, double entendres on top of double entendres, man, internal rhyme on top of forced rhyme, on top of end rhyme, on top of cross beat rhyme, cross bar rhyme. Like dude was just phenomenal lyrically. And the types of things that he was doing, perhaps particularly at a time when he started doing it, as hip hop was reaching its, getting close up the ladder of commercial success, and everybody knows hip hop artists' names. He was one of these cats that I was talking about that you never caught on the radio. Like you never heard a Doom record on the radio, but he's your favorite rapper's favorite rapper. And that says a lot. And man, just listening to him over the years, man, and watching what he did in terms of maintaining and sustaining a career in an industry that says, if you're not up in everybody's face every 5 minutes, then you're trash. He showed a lot of cats, man, over 20 years that, I could eat real good, man, taking care of my family, man, being self-contained, understanding the mathematics of the business, and being a dope artist at the same time. So man, shouts out to Doom, man. I first got notice of his death like early November. A student had hit me with a little post like, "Yo, man, Doom died." I was like, "Nah, man, come on, dude." And until his family released a statement in, I think it was January, I really thought it was a stunt. I thought what he meant was Doom was dead. Like he was going to come back out without the mask and be
Dude.
like, yo, I'm back, baby. Doom is dead, but I'm back. And I thought, man, just because that was the kind of thing, man, that over the years, man, he just did phenomenal stuff, man, and as an artist, man, and to maintain and sustain himself, man. I thought, he was one of those underappreciated MCs, man, who was just starting to get appreciated, kind of like Sean Price. RP Sean Price as well, man. I think Freddie Gibbs, man. I think a couple of those guys, man, were, way doper MCs. Nipsey Hussle, I think, goes in that same category, man. Somebody who it was kind of posthumously that we realized, like, we really lost some real dopeness here.
Yeah, literally, man. And it's like whenever it came to Doom passing, like how you said, like you didn't think that was what they meant. I thought like he's about to release a new album or something. I was like, oh, it's coming. Okay. Like, this is crazy. Like,
yeah. Because word was he had something cooking.
Yeah, like it's just his theatrics were just insane, bro. Like he was so much more than a rapper, the comic book stuff.
Yeah.
Just everything, man. He was so fucking so cool. My bad. So cool. And yeah, seriously, rest in peace. Seriously. Rest in peace, MF.
All right. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A, and just a good conversation going on in there about follow-ups and people chiming in about some of the points that everyone has made, which have been exceptional. And I think that we've checked off a lot of boxes here. But I want to get into a question that I read that I opened up to the esteemed panel, and this question comes from Alma, and it says, do you have to be black or brown to be considered to be hip hop? Is hip hop reserved for those who are black and brown? Are they the only ones who should authentically be hip hop?
I'll touch on that just quick from a historical perspective. First of all, no, and hip hop never really has all been black and brown. You can read about Charlie Chase, man, DJ Charlie Chase, whose real name is Carlos Mendez. He was a DJ for the Cold Crush Brothers, man, a Latin brother. Man, Rick Rubin been around for a very long time in the culture and being significant. I think hip hop has always been an everybody thing. You can't have a park jam and then dictate who comes in and who comes out. I think that's all. The diversity has always been one of the beauties of hip hop. You look at graffiti, and graffiti from square one was diverse, and that diversity, carried it as far as it's going now. Like Banksy right now is considered the dopest graffiti artist walking right now, and he's a white dude from England. So I think hip hop has always been diverse, but I think one of the things that happened with hip hop, like it is all black art. In this country, if you want to make something look bad, all you gotta do is call it black. You want to make it look scary, call it young and black. You want to make it look terrifying, call it poor young black. You want to make it look absolutely threatening and horrifying, call it poor young black male. And hip hop wore that stigma for a very long time. It's not like Sylvia Robinson didn't produce Rappers Delight. It's not like Sylvia Rome wasn't one of the most important hip hop executives of the early 80s and 90s. So hip hop has always been diverse, but I think like a lot of black art, it gets shined on through this lens of blackness. And once again, we only see it through that lens, and the peripheral, the DJs, the B-boys, the graph writers, the MCs, the producers. We've always had diversity in hip hop. We've just not been able to acknowledge it, even though it does spring from the essence of black and brown and poor people. I think that's the other thing that we forget about the socialism in hip hop and how it's a poor working class culture that developed into this billion-dollar industry with all of the warts that are going to come along with that.
Thank you. Does anyone else care to chime in on that? Well said.
Thank
you. I personally feel like hip hop definitely isn't only for black people. If that was the case, there wouldn't be so many other ethnicities in it. But me personally, just growing up, like Mac Miller, like one of my favorite artists of my lifetime. And I think whenever it comes to being like a great, respected artist in hip hop who isn't black, you just need to understand where it comes from. You know what I mean? Like hip hop isn't only for black people, but black people are who made hip hop what it is. You know what I mean? In my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So,
can I just follow up on that? I mean, that was the only point I was going to make. Who participates in the culture is another question, but I think we can never lose sight of who created the art form. Same thing with jazz. Without Black folk, you do not have hip hop. You do not have jazz. You do not have spiritual. But more importantly, without slavery, without oppression, you know. So if you negate Black people, you essentially negate the history that is so fundamental to the art, the creation of the art.
I have another question from the audience here. I'm glad that we're having such a good, robust conversation here. And this one comes from a Cal U faculty member, Dr. Cody Stone, who may have trolled Dr. Spradley and I in a group text about when my favorite color had said that we're all older, only 32. So like, but so he was trolling us, but without further ado, and this question was directed towards Professor Terman, and but I'm sure that the entire panel could definitely touch on this here, and it reads: have you seen a growth of hip hop studies in gender and women's studies or feminist study areas?
Is it how have I seen, or how has it grown?
Okay, so it's have you seen a growth of hip hop?
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of dope scholars, Black feminist scholars within hip hop. Man, Kimberly Crenshaw, I think, you know, off the top of the head, who pretty much, man, navigated the whole intersectionality conversation and made it kind of like the soup du jour in academia for some time. I think, man, you can look at Patricia Rose, who wrote what was at one time considered a seminal text in hip hop, Black Noise. So I think that those voices have always been there. But once again, if you look at hip hop through this macro lens, and it's kind of like, you know, this big picture of what everybody sees. Well, I think that's the same conversation we're having with artists like the Cornel West, the Dysons, the Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s. They're the shiny objects that are always on television. No disrespect to any of those brothers, your Gateses, your those, but for every last one of those, you have your Dawn Elise Fisher out of Santa Ana Barbara, man. You got your Trisha Roses, you got your Rosa Clementes, you got your Kimberly Crenshaws, and the list goes on and on and on. So yes, I know of a lot of those female scholars in hip hop, and I know they do phenomenal work. Many of them are perhaps so well known that their work has, perhaps they're not seen as a hip hop person, even though they are.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Spradley?
Sure. So I think that I definitely agree with everything that Dr. Tuman said. One of the things that it just made me think about was the Tuesday discussion when you asked, Kellen, you asked Dr. West, like, is there space for hip hop in the academy, right? Like, should it be there? I'm paraphrasing your question, so I hope you don't get upset with me as misquoting. But he talked about that if the academy embraced hip hop, then it had to not only embrace hip hop, but it had to embrace and unveil the truth and the suffering behind hip hop, right? And so when we're talking about this idea of women in hip hop and women in gender studies, a lot of those hip hop women are coming through with pain because they weren't included in other things, right? When you're talking about Kimberly Crenshaw, it was important for us to talk about intersectionality because we cannot Black women don't fit in feminism, period. The way that it was originally designed, right? And so then you have to have books like Hood Feminism come out to say, like, you know what? Y'all can talk about like 77 cents to the dollar, but there's women that are not making salaries. So we need to go back to minimum wage, right? And so we've got to be able to critically look at all aspects of it. And we have to acknowledge that a lot of this stuff comes from suffering and pain. And it's hard for people to look at it and be like, I know that you were hurt, so let's talk about it. Nobody wants to do that. But you can't not do that if you're including hip hop, because that's what hip hop is, right? It's an experience. We can't just, like everybody's saying, we can't just have one experience that's on the radio, because there's 100 other people who have had a different experience. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to boil this down to about 4 more questions. I'm going to take, now there's a question in the chat for Dr. Edmunds. I'm just a model. I'm just a civilian. I'm a bystander. But it goes, do you think that the impact of gangster, of the glamorization of the gangster lifestyle is to have a self-destructive effect on the Black community, especially since their listeners are oftentimes very impressionable young people? Of course it can, but I mean, and I'll be very short because I'm gonna kick this off to the experts. But in some ways, I look at hip hop as part of pop culture. Like, does Grand Theft Auto have a detrimental impact on young people? When I was growing up, I saw Stallone and Schwarzenegger kill about 10,000 people when I was a young kid, and you know that didn't. I was able to discern that I'm not going to go out and do those particular things, right? I was a big fan of pro wrestling, and I wasn't like until like 12 years old till I realized that that was organized violence. I thought they were really going at each other, right? But I was consuming violence, right? And I loved it, right? And I was able to discern. Now, I don't want to oversimplify this. Of course it does, because a lot of young, impressionable individuals do look up to these individuals. So you have to be careful of the things that you consume, absolutely. But I think it goes back to what we said previously. A lot of times there's an unfair burden on hip hop, right? That we don't spread that burden out to other genres of music or culture. You all want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Trisha Rose discusses hip hop within the context of a magnifying mirror. And I think that's very important, because I think hip hop is unique in a way it magnifies reality in a way that's unique. It's different than what Stallone was doing. You know what I'm saying? I knew Stallone, he and I were different. Rocky, I didn't really see myself as Stallone. But I mean, I'm gonna go out on a limb here. Somebody who saw the emergence of the Bloods and Crips in New Jersey in a time where I never thought it would happen in New Jersey, you know, as a New Jersey native. I largely blame hip hop culture for the proliferation of Bloods, Crips, GDs throughout the country and throughout the world. I don't want to do that, because I love hip hop. I love Black people. I love Black communities, but I don't know how it would have spread so quickly had it not been for the narratives within hip hop. Jim Jones, The Game, Snoop. I mean, this is problematic on one level. So, I mean, I could go on about that, but I'll leave it there.
I saw a lot of hum and han from
yeah. I'm gonna go back to you know, it's hard to blame hip hop on stuff that existed way before hip hop uttered its first verse. It's not like Tuka Williams was running around listening to Tupac and started the Grape Street Crips. I mean, so if we talk about the proliferation, let's talk about the proliferation of poverty, suffering, and oppression. Let's talk about the proliferation of the over-policing of Black neighborhoods. Let's talk about the proliferation of programs intended to create gangsters. And it's also interesting to me how we play this this linguistic game when we talk about gangsters, like Tony Montana, Don Corleone. They're gangsters, but for some reason, there's a difference between that gangster and the gangster that's selling crack cocaine on the corner. I would submit that there's no difference between the two. There's a difference in terms of how we view them, and I think that's because the way we view them is shaped through, as Boom so eloquently put it, through Dr. Rose, this magnification of Black culture through the lens of hip hop. But hip hop didn't invent gangs. Hip hop didn't invent the reason that a group of young men might coalesce to protect themselves or to make money in a capitalist society, in a society that doesn't educate them properly, doesn't provide them with proper shelter, or any of the other things that sustain a quote unquote good life, if there's to be one to be had. So I think that we stand the risk of blaming hip hop for social ills that it had very little to do with initially. And if we're talking about proliferation, that would be like saying that Freeway Ricky was responsible for the proliferation of crack cocaine. Well, yeah, you can say that, but there's some folk called the CIA that was kind of right behind that. So to say that hip hop proliferated gang activity, behavior, thoughts, actions, like hip hop ain't bought one AK-47. Hip hop didn't make one AK-47. Hip hop didn't make it to where assault rifles were really available in particular neighborhoods. So I would certainly put a break up on that.
Yeah, I legitimately agree with everything you just said. Like, and I'm gonna keep it short too, but at the end of the day, a lot of those people who are rappers who are rapping about being in gangs and whatnot, they were in gangs before they were rappers. You know what I mean? Like, this is just all of them rapping about their life. Like, at the end of the day, hip hop is just rapping about your lifestyle, everything you're going through. So just because he's rapping about running from the cops and some random kid in Arkansas does that, that doesn't mean he wasn't running from the cops beforehand, you know, before he was a rapper. Like, that's just his lifestyle, you know what I mean? And just like every other form of entertainment, there's a lot of people who are impressionable. And like Professor Edmunds said, like, if a kid's going to play Grand Theft Auto and steal a car, you know, it's kind of on the kid to me. Like, these are all just representations. And none of these rappers are telling, well, no rappers that I know of are telling these kids go out and shoot people. You know what I'm saying? They're just talking about their life. And their life just happens to be just that, honestly.
Can I push back? Because I think we let hip hop artists off the hook. I mean, Lil Wayne grew up in hip hop. He grew up in New Orleans. To my knowledge, there was not a big blood community in New Orleans. Big U, who's a Rolling 60s Crip, talks about watching the Kings of New York and that having a heavy influence on how he would navigate his gangsterism. There's a film, I think it's 88 or 84, Colors, with Sean Penn about gang culture. And so I know that these texts are not the source, the primary source. However, I think they are complicit in the proliferation. I mean, and one good example of this is drill, hip hop. It's been imported from the UK and then exported back out to the UK. And these young brothers, and I saw a clip about Irish drill music. And so I think we have to really examine this drill music and this gang culture. And I don't think we shouldn't blame hip hop, but we shouldn't let artists off the hook, because I would argue that these brothers aren't gangsters. Lil Wayne, who did he shoot? Who did he kill? Yeah, who brought him in? What blood brought this brother in, right? And so again, I think as hip hop lovers, we sometimes let hip hop off the hook because I don't know how Bloods and Crips will proliferate at that fast rate without hip hop. I think hip hop is at least partially responsible for that.
I think Doc Boone, I think the historical record is perhaps a little more clear than you're seeing. Black folk migrated. Starting somewhere around the late 40s, 50s, and on through the 70s and 80s. Many folk who find themselves in New York, if they trace their family roots, would find that they're not as New York as they perhaps think they are. Maybe 1 or 2 or 3 generations away from being Southern or Western or somewhere else. So I think that, you know, those things follow people. As the brother, my favorite color said, artists reflect. And if, you know, you don't have to be in a gang, but if you're Ice Cube in Compton in the late 1970s, even though you got 2 parents at the crib and you're going to college, you still might say, to quote the song, "Fuck the police." Doesn't mean that you yourself are doing said thing to said police officers. But if you live in an environment where those things proliferate, then perhaps you're talking about what you see. And Russell Simmons said a long time ago that hip hop artists often hold a mirror up to society, and society just don't like what it sees.
Exactly.
So I think that if you want to talk about the proliferation of gangster culture, I think we could also blame media.
Of course.
So that, and with it, I'll agree with you in that hip hop being one part of media, might have some responsibility therein, but no more than you call colors. I'm a big fan of New Jack City. There were a whole bunch of Nino Browns running around here in the middle 1990s, but the movie didn't make them. Like, I don't know anybody who sold dope in the late 80s that was like, yo, I just finished listening to this Coogee rap record. I'm gonna go sell some dope now. like I don't know. I don't know that happened, bro. And I don't know that anybody got jumped into a gang because they was like, I just finished listening to a documentary with Game, and Game of Pyru Blood, so I'm finna be a Pyru Blood. Like, you really can't roll up the blood sets with that mentality
I love
and get
That's
jumped in. Like, you might get jumped on, but you're not fit to get jumped in because you coming up there spitting some I heard Game's documentary knowledge. I think, man, the proliferation of gangs comes down to the proliferation of suffering, proliferation of poverty, proliferation of poor education, proliferation of over-policing of some particular neighborhoods. Like, you do all those things and you're gonna make a gang. Hell, you talk about movies, Gangs of New York was set in the late 19th century, and those were gangsters and wasn't no hip hop around. Like, Frank Lucas was selling hella heroin in New York and wasn't no hip hop around. Once again, as part of the media, I'll accept hip hop's responsibility as one slither of a much bigger pie, but to say that the proliferation of the Bloods and Crips on the East Coast is partially hip hop's responsibility, I think is a bridge too far for me.
Partially to blame is what I said. I think they're implicit. Yeah.
I don't know if it has to be either or, right? I think it can be both and.
Right.
I don't think that it's necessarily hip hop is responsible, but I would argue that hip hop is complicit in this romanticized narrative of what it is to be a gangster, right? Because I was thinking about like my favorite hip hop lyric, and when DMX passed, one of my cousins posted on Facebook. She posted the video of Slippin', right? And I remember like DMX talked about like his struggle with drugs in a way that made me never, ever, 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 ever want to do crack. Not that I was thinking about it or it was on the table, right? But the way that he articulated the story and the struggle and the demons that he fought, it made me understand that wasn't a fight that I wanted to be in. Every song that we hear about in hip hop does not make it seem like that. I've listened to songs, and I will be honest, in my college days, I was like, should I be getting this degree or should I be out on this pole? Because it seems like they're making way more money than me. I mean, we obviously know which decision won because I'm right here. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there was a glamorized, romanticized version of the streets. And I can tell you, like the version that DMX was telling was real to me because I'm an 80s baby, right? And so when crack was taking out Black men and Black families in the late 80s, early 90s, like those were my uncles, those were my dads, that was my dad, right? And so it really explained what was going on in the culture, right? I didn't get to ask my dad, are you struggling with this? But I could listen to Slippin' and be like, oh, this is what's really happening, right? So I think that hip hop can be both and. It can be a romanticized version of what's really out there, and it can also explain the answers to questions that we never got to ask.
Definitely. Real quick, on hip hop being the reason why some of these gangs outside of, just gangs on the East Coast started, I know for a fact, like a few people on the West Coast moved to the East Coast and said, yo, I'm gonna start a set over here. Like, a lot of it wasn't because of hip hop. Like, a lot of people just happened to move to those places and decided, yeah, I'm about to make this place like where I was at because that's what I miss. So at the end of the day, hip hop, movies, it's entertainment. But whenever it comes to hip hop, a lot more people are speaking on, their real life. Like a lot more of it is based on a true story. But I highly doubt that's the reason why we have the amount of gangs we have on the East Coast.
Not the sole reason. Let me just say one thing. I think Tekashi 6ix9ine crystallizes what I'm talking about, right? That he understood that by marketing himself as a blood, right? Not only would he get protection, but it would lead to record sales. And I think on the other end, we have somebody like Tupac Shakur, who grew up a poet, but somehow, I'm not going to go into how, got drawn into gang culture, particularly blood culture. It cost him his life. Right? He wasn't a gangster. So then I will pose this question. Why do these artists adopt this gangsterism, particularly blood and Crip? Is it for protection? Is it because it's a selling point?
I think it's a combination of everything you just said, especially whenever it comes to Tekashi and Tupac. They weren't doing that because of music. They were doing that because the people who they made music around were that. You know what I mean? So they were just adapting to what was around them and what they had to do to feel protected and accepted. But I won't say they did that to sell records. I just say the people who was in charge with their records being sold were really like that.
And I'd add that I think you can perhaps counterbalance Tekashi with a Nipsey Hussle, who lived the life that he spoke of, but also recognized the necessity to manifest of himself a better existence through hip hop. Hip hop clearly became the vehicle for Nipsey Hussle to attempt. Now he's still slain in the end, obviously, but I think this is the same thing that happens to unknown kids in the hood all the time, and we don't see that. Like, every gangster is not born a gangster. For some of these kids, they grow up in environments where the choice is get down or get rolled on. And the average human is going to choose to get down. Now, after having been down for so long, eventually you're going to have to take action. And I think that this is where we have a problem. But once again, I would agree wholeheartedly that hip hop is, at least in part, complicit. But once again, as are movies, as is American culture, as is capitalism, as is poverty, as is a whole bunch of other things. So that I think we could remove hip hop and gang culture with all of the same stimuli would still take place in particular neighborhoods. If there was no hip hop, there would still be Bloods and Crips and Gangster Disciples and Latin Kings and MS-13s and the Aryan Brotherhood and the whole shebang. And so that's where, for me, I think, and then I think, once again, the glamorization, fetishness of Black pain is not endemic to hip hop. Like, why would Ralph Ellison writes about smokers where white men would throw hot coins in a boxing ring and have Black youth fight to pick up hot coins. Like, that's some sadistic, crazy stuff that you're entertained by that pain. And I think hip hop just becomes another in a long line of avenues for particular groups of people to be entertained by Black pain. Now, in a capitalist society, do we then poke finger at the artist for quote unquote playing along, or perhaps even create an image of his or herself that allows such fetishness? In a capitalist nation, can we really do that? Like, which of us on this panel can turn down $10 million? I can't. And trust and believe, if Jimmy Iovine walked in my house right now and offered me a $10 million check to do a Murder, Death, Kill hip hop record, I'm fitting to kill a whole bunch of people on that record.
Dang.
Trust and believe. Now, what I do with that $10 million afterwards, I'm not going to buy 10 Rolls Royces, but it's a capitalist society. And so I think that when we look at why does sex sell? That's not women's fault. It's not women's fault that you can put some cleavage, let some cleavage show and sell hamburgers, which have nothing to do with cleavage. Like, why is that a thing? And so, of course, somebody's going to use Black pain and suffering to sell music. They use fetishes to sell all kinds of things, and many of us buy those products.
Hey, we covered a lot on that one right there. We covered a lot. I'm thankful for that. We're at the latter part of this, and we're going to wrap this up soon. We're going to take one more question from the Q&A, but I want to say this to all the audience members. There is a survey that we want everybody, I think it's located in the chat. Is that correct, Dr. Taylor?
Yeah, so there is a survey that will be popping up in the chat, and
okay.
and I do have one question from the chat.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that before anybody leaves, as far as audience members, please, it's important that we get that data for events like this. So make sure you fill out that survey. Dr. Taylor, you have one more question, and then I'll wrap up with a question.
Certainly. All right. So this one comes from S. Galladay in the chat, and it kind of talks, I guess, about this maybe in the spirit of the hamburger and the cleavage, but I think that's pathos as a rhetorical mode of appeal. You know, appeals to emotions. So this also touches on from a point that Dr. Boone had come around earlier, and it says, I like to push back on Boone's point about male artists because MC Hammer danced around in gold thongs and was successful at it. So again, more of the hamburger and the cleavage. The question that flows from this is, has hip hop passed the 1990s hip hoppers and the criticism these news rappers face? So anyone care to touch upon that question?
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah. All right.
Do you like restate it?
Sure. So it touches on and says that MC Hammer danced around in gold thongs and was successful at it. So the question is, has hip hop, I'll frame it this way. Has there been a deviation? If we've had someone like MC Hammer doing this sort of work, do you feel that hip hop has changed in that way?
I feel like hip hop nowadays is at a point where, especially like today, and people always like look at me funny whenever I say it, but I'm dead serious. I think hip hop is like in the best position it's ever been in.
What?
And yeah, and I think that because you could legitimately be whoever you want to be. Like literally, some people of course choose the fraud, these little lifestyles they're claiming they live, but you don't even have to do that anymore. Like, if you're a random dude from Arkansas who likes bagels, you can make a song about it and blow up off of it. Like, it's like, I think we're at a point now in 2021 where you could legitimately be whoever you want to be. And I think that's what a lot of rappers subconsciously wish they could have been in the early 2000s, because there was a time where you legitimately had to be a gangster rapper. Like, if you ain't sell coke, bro, you weren't popping. Like, it was not happening. And I remember growing up and seeing Graduation outsell Curtis. And I looked at that like, yo, mom, like maybe one day I could be a rapper. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so legitimately, yeah, I think right now hip hop's in the best position it's ever been in. You could be whoever you want. If somebody wants to be MC Hammer, come out, bro. Make a YouTube video. You might go viral. Make a TikTok. You might go viral. It doesn't matter, bro. Like, I think right now is the best time to be yourself. And I think being yourself is better than anything you could be.
Well, I think the short answer to that, Dr. Taylor, is yes. Of course, hip hop has changed, and so have we. It's, you know, if we talk about hip hop dating it from Rappers of Light 1979 until the present day, a bunch of stuff have changed, and of course, hip hop would too. Hip hop is a living, breathing thing because it's an art form. Painting is different from what Rembrandt and them were doing. Dance is different. Music is different. So, you know, as the old saying goes, the only thing constant is change. I think once again, when we have these conversations about hip hop, we're really talking about commercial hip hop, which is something that has always irked me, because it's like, if it's not on the radio, it's not hip hop. But as far as I'm concerned, hip hop doesn't live just on commercial radio. It's a much bigger galaxy, if you would.
Yeah,
so yes, it's changed.
Real quick, just to touch back on it, like, I guess like my answer would be yes, it has changed, but I personally think it changed for the better. Personally.
Yeah, I want to touch on the gender. No, Dr. Spradley, did you want to jump in?
No, you go ahead. I'll jump in after you.
Okay, I just wanted to touch on the gender piece. I mean, I think in terms of sexuality, I think hip hop has progressed, right? Because we have like people like Lil Nas X, young MA, and all these other folk. But I think in terms of gender, I'm not sure. Me personally, I'm a little disappointed in hip hop. If I think back to artists like Lauryn Hill, if I think back to the early '90s, I thought hip hop trajectory was going to look slightly different than it is now with the lean culture and the gangster culture. And there's one case study I think we should look at, right? Not so much a case study, but one observation, and that is 99%, if not 100% of female hip hop artists, particularly mainstream, come by way of men. Rhapsody, MC Lyte, Lauryn Hill. So I would like to see a movement of all female artists. FUBU for them, well, not FUBU, Fu something, was created by them for them. I can't think of the acronym, but so because I think as long as women have to go through men to enter the culture, I think that's problematic, and I think it always will affect the art. So we've changed, but not enough. Is my point.
I guess what I'm trying to say is we have changed, and that's what makes me think progression is happening slowly but surely.
Or regression.
Yeah, I don't agree. I don't think it's regression. I do not think it's regression.
Okay, all right.
The MC ain't backing down. He thinks he's got a better place.
I don't think it's regression, bro. I do not think it's regression.
You're talking about my livelihood here.
My favorite color. Never get into a debate with a guy who says wapification.
Nah, that's facts, bro. I heard that earlier and I ain't touch on it. But no, it's all good though. I mean, I'll debate about it all day.
Right.
He got a full clip of Booneisms.
Yeah, pretty good.
Hey, look, artists today, this generation are more independent than artists of our generation, right?
It's amazing just to watch. Like right now is really crazy. Like, especially if you're really paying attention, like you could really do whatever you want. The internet, of course, like was a blessing and a curse, but this is amazing. Like it's really crazy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Technology has changed and given a lot of different people access, right? But also what we accept in our society has changed. I don't know if Lil Nas X would have got the same acceptance in 1979, right? Oh,
would not have.
See what I'm saying? Like,
that's the thing though. Do you think Lil Nas X getting this acceptance is a bad thing or a good thing? Like, do you consider it progression or regression? Because I consider it progression.
Yeah, I do.
So here's the thing. I don't consider it either. I consider it I would say a differential in the value of people, right? Like, because before we were not allowing people to be or valuing their entire humanity. We were saying you look like this or you identify as this, so you need to be this. And if you don't do this, then you can't be in front of a mic. Like, you don't get the mic, right? And so I think that it's more of a reflection on society and what we're accepting and not condemning in our society than it is on hip hop. Because I think that arguably all genres of music are changing, right? Like there was a big debate over Lil Nas X and Billy Ray Cyrus if they should get a country music award or not. And I'm like, yo, like Billy Ray Cyrus is kind of like, I don't like, what is he of hip hop? Like, would he be? He's like somebody's dad and grandpa of, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, like if he's doing a track on your record, you need some sort of award.
You need a country award,
right? Right. So I think that and the fact that society is changing is forcing everybody to change. That slow change that Dr. Boone is talking about, like people like slow change. It allows you to get adjusted, right? Even a lobster won't scream if the water is boiled slowly. Now, but that's not, I feel like we're at a critical junction in culture where people are at a point where there is so much freedom that eventually we are going to stop asking for permission and saying that this needs to happen now. And I think that's when the storm starts.
Great.
For sure. I guess whenever I say I think hip hop is changing for the better, I'm just more so referring to, I think there are quote unquote great hip hop artists everywhere. You just got to find them. You know what I mean? But I also think there's quote unquote bad ones who apply to the people whose opinions we don't take as seriously. And I think that's super important. Like, I think hip hop is an art form to apply to so many different types of people and to adapt to so many different types of people. I think that was the point. Sort of like, I think, like, of course, like, it's for Black people, but there's so many different types of Black people. You know what I mean? So that's why I'm saying it's progression, just because it's showing every side of everything. And for hip hop to actually become the greatest art form the way I know it is, I think it's gonna apply to everything and be rooted in what it actually is, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Hey, look, this is how we're gonna close this out. We're gonna begin with Dr. Spradley, and we're gonna go down the line. Well, I don't know if you can see my line the way that I can see it, but we're going to get to this last question in closing. I want everybody to address this. What's next for hip hop, artistically, as well as in the academy? We get back to our fundamental question of this particular panel. What's next for hip hop? Dr. Spradley, can you lead us?
Sure. I think artistically, I mean, I would love to see some of the For Us, By Us from women, right? What does it look like to have an all women label? What does it look like for women to condone and certify a WAP dropping, like a whopping? I don't know. Or do you know, like, what does it look like for that to come out all by women, or for the narrative to change and it be by women? And so I think that would be I think that's in the future of artistically. I think academically, I think one of the things we have to realize is we're not in control of hip hop being brought into the academy. It's already there because we're there, right? And if they don't want hip hop, then they don't want us. And now that I am a them, I'm here, right? And because there's all this freedom, we can't take it out of the academy. So I think that we embrace it. I think that we allow our students to identify with it, and we continue to use it as a tool to speak truth to power.
Dr. Boone.
Yeah, I would like to see more truly radical narratives in hip hop. Not the sort of gangster posturing narratives that go against the status quo, that dismantle systems of oppression. Oftentimes, what I hear in hip hop, mainstream hip hop, are reinforcements of these oppressions, whether it be patriarchy, whether it be fratricide, brothers killing each other, drug use. I think I would love to see alternative narratives. I would like to see, in terms of the academy, I would love to see hip hop come back to its roots at the HBCU. I think it's been co-opted by predominantly white institutions. I would like to see community colleges and HBCUs move to the forefront. And so there's a model at Temple University that's past separate community school. Michael Cord is a lawyer, has been doing great work. He's affiliated with the university, but he's not a tenure track professor. And then last, I would like to see more diverse articulations of masculinity. I think we have very, very narrow articulations of masculinity. This bravado, objectification of women. I would like to see, for lack of a better term, a feminization of masculine traits in hip hop.
I will say this, something that is very pleasing. There's a celebration of fatherhood, hip hop.
Yes.
I think that's almost a reclaiming of some of the things that were going on in the 70s and the 80s. I like, fatherhood is cool right now. It's not cool if you don't take care of your kids. I really like the celebration of that in conjunction to a lot of other things as well. Brother Turman.
Yeah. Well, first of all, man, I think you'd have to be Jesus of Nazareth to predict where hip hop is going, and I'm not he. So I wouldn't even go so far as to say that, as Dr. Boone said, I could talk about my wish list. And I think that my wish list, as is Dr. Boone's, is predicated on ownership. And for me, what I would like to see as Dr. Spradley said, you know, like what would this hip hop record label look like? Where the A&Rs, the producers, everybody, do they co-sign the whoppification of hip hop? Boom, I'm running with that. But what I would like to see on the other end of that spectrum would be ownership. Like, what would it look like if hip hop owned the methods of distribution, vis-a-vis radio stations, television programs? Like, we got Diddy with Revolt TV, but what would it look like if there were a string of radio stations owned by folks? So out in the West, maybe E40 owns the Bay Area radio station, and Bun B owns the South Texas radio station, and we give Master P the New Orleans radio station. Like what would it look like in terms of what we would hear commercially? Because this conversation about where hip hop is going, as far as I'm concerned, hip hop has been on this fast lane autobahn, you know, for the better part of 40 years, and there are two concurrent lanes. There's this one commercial lane, which falls prey to all of the whims of commercial and consumer culture, capitalism. And what does that mean? These record labels are not social justice organizations. Like Interscope is not the NAACP. They're never going to be about the business of producing social justice warriors. And their shareholders don't want them to, because they're about making money. That's what they do. What sells is what make money. I tell folk all the time, like, look, if Talib Kweli sold 10 million records tomorrow, there would be 500 Talib Kweli's on the radio tomorrow. But Talib Kweli don't sell 10 million records. So who's to blame on that? If you own a record label and your job is to make money and only one kind of your product is selling, what do? You push the product that doesn't sell. So you push this Dr. King hip hop that nobody's buying. Well, the reason that we know Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul and the Wu-Tang Clan and Public Enemy is because they sold records. If those kind of artists sold records today, then we would hear them on the radio today, because these record labels, as far as I'm concerned, don't really give a dang about the suppression of the Black community. They give a dang about making money. Now, perhaps if they can make money and suppress the Black community, maybe they're down with that win-win, if you believe that. But they're not going to tank because folks stop buying records that display the suppression and oppression and subjugation of Black folk. If those records stop selling, they would stop making them. So I would like to see what it would look like if hip hop cats owned not only the methods of production, like rap cats have been owning labels for a long time. So that's not the problem, evidently. We're 40 years into this thing now, and Def Jam has been around, 34? So that's not the problem. The problem is what happens at the distribution point. Like if you go into, particularly here in Greensboro, the local radio station, which is the hottest radio station in North Carolina for hip hop, you're not going to get your little CD played on the station like you could have in 1994. Like we got now the same thing that happened with the record labels. We got 4 or 5 companies that own all of the radio stations. And that's the method of production. And so as Boone is talking about, you know, this music that seems to proliferate gangsterism, seems to be all about one particular style of Black masculinity. Well, that's the same thing with movies. Like why does the Wonder Woman sell as much as Avengers? They're both dope films. They're both superheroes, but it's not Wonder Woman's fault that the audience, male, female, and other, for whatever reason, doesn't attach themselves to heroines in the way they do the heroes. So until we can do something about the method of distribution, vis-a-vis hip hop cats actually owning radio stations and then deciding what goes on the commercial airways, I think we're always going to have that with commercial radio. I don't think that's ever changing as far as I'm concerned. What I would like to see happen as we move into the future will be more about honesty in hip hop. Like, I'm really cool with you if you're a gangster in hip hop. If you're a real gangster, as a brother said, many of these cats grew up real gangsters. Like, I'm sweet on this dude called Honeycomb Brazy. I don't know if y'all know about my man Honeycomb Brazy, but Honeycomb Brazy come out of Alabama and he brazy for sure. like he got that life, boss, and he not just doing it because he don't get fined. I'm good with that. I'm not good with some middle class kid taking a bunch of pictures in his room with a pistol that he borrowed from his hood friend, and then talking about he gangster. I'm not good with that. As far as the academy, I think that cow left the barn, as we say down here in the country. Hip hop is going to be in the academy because there are folk running around here right now with advanced degrees who are hip hop people, and they're bringing hip hop wherever they go. I used to be an anomaly in that area within even a black college like A&T. Wasn't a whole lot of hip hop professors, quote unquote, at A&T when I decided to do what I was doing the way I was doing it. Primarily because I was adjunct and I wouldn't get paid a whole lot of money, so they couldn't really dictate how I got down. But I see now a rack of young folk with advanced degrees who wear the hip hop on their sleeve. And I think that's where, and these aren't all humanities folk. Like, these are STEM folk, these are biologists and chemists and economists and all up the line. So I think that as far as the academy goes, hip hop has solidified itself both as a part of the hierarchy that Dr. Taylor was talking about in terms of the canon of what is the best of art and literature. Like, I don't think you can be a humanist of any shade at any school nowadays and not at least respect the idea of hip hop in the academy and call yourself a real humanist. Well, if you don't, then you're just a racist. Like, your degrees have nothing to do with that mentality. Because at this point, I think it's clear that hip hop has infused itself in just about every aspect of particularly American society. And I was somebody so far to say even global society. Like, I don't think you're going anywhere in the developed or the quote unquote undeveloped world. Now, I remember Dr. Boone and I having a conversation when he was down in South Korea about being out of the night spot and seeing cats spinning around on their back. Like, you know, hip hop is here. Hip hop is going to stay. I think it's going to stay in the academy because it's going to stay everywhere. I just think that hip hop is a mansion. There's a bunch of rooms in this mansion, and for whatever reason, commercial radio likes to play around in the bathroom. But I don't think that's hip hop's fault. There's a whole lot of other rooms in that mansion. There is the social justice library that Boone speaks of. I think there is a bedroom that is as non-gender as any other bedroom in global society nowadays. It just doesn't get the kind of commercial airplay, what makes what Lil Nas X is doing, even for somebody who doesn't necessarily like his music, makes it so phenomenal. I think just in terms of what he's doing and carving out an area for himself as an artist. I think Tyler, the Creator, man, my kids were big Future fans. I couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. I tried to listen to some of that Sweatshirt Earl or whatever that dude's name is, and I was like, yo, please stop. But then I realized how artistic and creative those cats are. And what they're doing with the culture is something that I didn't anticipate coming, man, as an old head rap fan. And I fought very hard, man, now in my 50s to not be my father's in terms of my taste of popular culture and always seeing it through a lens that has more to do with how many candles I got on my birthday cake than the art form itself. So I think hip hop is going wherever it wants to go, and I think hip hop is going to remain in the academy for sure.
Excellent. My favorite color, and then I pose the same question in closing to you, Dr. Taylor. So you go after my favorite color.
Can you say the question one more time? I was just like literally listening to him. It was just like he kept touching on so many extra things, and it was perfect. Like, but what was the exact question?
Yeah, what's next for hip hop, especially in your case, artistically? Where do you see it heading?
Honestly, I don't know, and that's the way I love it, man. I think hip hop could be whatever. like I was saying, like, and I think it's super awesome finally seeing artists be exactly who they want to be. Personally, I think a lot of artists that nobody expects are going to start collabing with people they didn't expect them to collab with, just to show how diverse they actually are and how outside of the box they could have been the entire time. Yeah, I think it's just going to keep progressing, man, honestly. And I hope I progress with it. You know, that's my goal. Whenever it comes to Academy, personally, I think hip hop is bigger than the Academy. I think it's this huge thing that I think the Academy had to accept hip hop because of how big hip hop was. So yeah, man, I think the Academy should just do exactly what hip hop's doing, keep progressing and keep adapting and touch on it the way they want to touch on it, but make sure it's the right way.
Yeah. Dr. West, in one of his responses, he was like, is the Academy worthy of hip hop? So yeah.
I mean, as long as a worthy person is teaching it, you know what I mean?
Okay. All right, my man. And I think all of us can admit, especially these old heads up here. I'm not talking about you, Dr. Spradley. But none of us, we love this art form and all of it. I know we devoted a lot of attention to the emceeing part of it. And that's my one regret is I didn't have enough questions about the beatboxing and the DJing and the graffiti and the breakdance, right? Which is probably the most diverse element of hip hop, the breakdance, and probably the most global component of it too, right? As far as participation, right? But that's the one thing I didn't hit on enough in terms of the questions. But nonetheless, I thought this was an excellent forum. Remember, everybody, do that survey. And I'm going to, I'm thankful to all of the panelists, Dr. Spradley, Dr. Boone, Professor Terman, my favorite color, keep doing your thing. And I'm very appreciative to Dr. Taylor, who's going to close us out with his opinion on the future of hip hop and the Academy.
Well, my stance comes as an academic who spent so long studying, going into school with a love and appreciation for reading and African American authors, and then it becomes your profession. And then at some point you're like, I'm only going to read in the summer after 2 months after the semester is ended because I don't want to read anymore. And I don't want it to become institutionalized to the effect where students are thinking like, oh, well, we are looking at this, but it's like, what? We have to look at intertextuality, and we have to look at pastiche, and we have to look at bricolage, and we start applying all these critical frames to it. And do students suddenly think that this is not what this is what I wanted to come to this class to learn things about my culture or learn about another culture. And then, but it's become institutionalized to the effect where it becomes like it's too sanitized. And I think that in the institution, we have to be mindful of that and maintain the essence of the art form.
40 years and going strong. Like, we never would have anticipated this.
Mm-hmm.
Man, 40 years and going strong. Hip hop is it's magical. So we'll see where it goes in the next 40 years, right? Thank you to everybody. And again, let's fill out that survey. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you for everybody who supported this, from levels of administration to faculty to staff to students. Everybody at Cal U on every level of administration was invested and supportive of this endeavor. And we are just so indebted to you all because it's 15 years in running. And we've had some of the biggest names from Dr. Cornel West to Dr. Michael Eric Dyson to Dr. Trisha Rose and Ursula Rucker and Black Thought, and the name Rakim, KRS-One, Charlamagne the God. The names just go on. And Cal U has been very receptive and supportive on every level about this conference and institutionalizing it. So I'm very appreciative about that. I don't have enough time to name all the names, but thank you all, and everybody have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Seriously.